Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Friend Zone. My name is Swizzle, and I'd like to welcome you to the debut episode of our new series called Let's Talk. In this series, we're going to talk about an episode of Star Trek. I'll give you my thoughts and feelings and impressions on the episode, and then, if you would like, leave your impressions and thoughts on the episode in the comment section below. Today, on our debut episode, it's only fitting that we start with not only a classic, but a classic of a classic. We're going to be starting with the first episode of Star Trek The Next Generation, Encounter at Farpoint. So, let's talk. This episode actually doesn't start with a cold open. It just starts with the title sequence, which I have to say, in 1987, whenever I was 9 years old and I first watched this, it was absolutely amazing to see that pull out through the solar system and then the impressive girth and mass of the Enterprise D shuffling back and forth along the screen. The episode proper kind of starts, in my opinion, both as a 9-year-old whenever I first watched this, as an adult now, kind of slow. The slow pull into the Enterprise D was absolutely majestic and fantastic, and only made better by the Blu-rays. The slow walk through engineering and then eventually up to the bridge was nice to give us both a sense of scale and size of the Enterprise, although it would have been nicer if they would have hit a couple of more locations in there, like, say, a cargo bay or even 10 forward. However, I realized that in real life, the production probably didn't have those sets established or built or something like that, and they kind of went with what they had. Upon rewatching this opening scene, another thing that I noticed is the way that Captain Picard talks about Commander Riker is that he just kind of knows his name. There's a fine officer waiting for us. He doesn't really seem like he knows him, although I do know that in later episodes it seems more like Riker was handpicked by Picard to be the executive officer of the Enterprise rather than a random Starfleet assignment. But maybe that's just me and I am misunderstanding the sequence. So the scene continues, and Picard mentions to Data the difficulty of Starfleet's orders, and Data says, "Solve the mystery of Farpoint Station." The issue that I have with this is, other than finding out who built it, which just a minute previously in his captain's log, Picard had said that Farpoint Station was built by the inhabitants of Deneb 4, who we will later learn is called the Bandy, although I don't know where they get Bandy for the inhabitants of a planet called Deneb 4, but we're not going to worry about that right now. You guys can put your theories in the comment section below. So Data reveals that he does not know the meaning of the word snoop, even though Picard later asked him, how can you be a encyclopedia of human knowledge and not know this word? While this sequence, I understand, was played for laughs and to establish Data's androidness, it was funny the first time. After that, it just got weaker and weaker as the rewatches go on. Now, that is a personal opinion, and your mileage may vary. Data also displays his tendency to overshare whenever it comes to information or definitions. This is a reoccurring theme that will continue, and it is great. While this is going on, we get the first hint of Counselor Troy's powers. Now, there are several places on the internet, several podcasts, and other places where there is a theory that Deanna Troi does not have any powers, that she's mostly just faking it, and that's why she's so vague. However, in this sequence right here, where we first are kind of introduced to her, because these are literally the first words that she has on screen, she starts detecting a mind, an enormous intelligence, something beyond human, not just not human, but beyond it. And this is the first time that we start getting into a little bit of something interesting in the episode, which is not bad considering that we're only 4 minutes and 22 seconds into the episode, and that's including the opening sequence. And this is the part of the episode where they introduce Q. And he's introduced with a big force field, and then he appears as what I've always assumed was a Spanish conquistador, but the Old English that he's speaking kind of throws that off a little bit. Uh, him transforming into the 1940s World War II soldier was kind of interesting as well. You got to get home and beat the commies, and it was really hilarious considering I believe it was 2 years after this that the Soviet Union fell. It was just this whole sequence is just hilarious. There are a couple of things that I've noticed in it though. Q really likes using this force field in this episode because he stops the ship with it. He stops security coming out of the elevator with it, which was hilarious. The other thing that I've noticed is he doesn't have his snap yet. He does not snap, at least in the parts of the episode that I was really paying attention to whether Q snapped his fingers or not. He did not snap. He looks at the elevator and the force field pops up. He just simply looks at Torres, says, "Stay where thou art," and then Torres gets blasted with fog, freezing him, which in 1987, whenever this came out, I was 9 years old, and 9-year-old me didn't get that. It wasn't until a few years later that I got that Q told him to freeze, and he froze. Immediately after Torres falls to the ground, Picard does the weirdest thing I think I've seen in any Star Trek. He pulls the little Type 1 phaser out of Torres's frozen grip, looks at it, turns to Q and says, "He wouldn't have harmed you. Do you recognize this? A stun setting? Why would an obvious alien that no one in your organization has ever met, to the best of your knowledge, know the particulars of your technology?" I've never understood why Picard said it that way because it seemed so rude. There's multiple other ways he could have said that line, even the same words, just a different inflection on them. And expecting an alien to recognize a setting on an unfamiliar bit of technology, even an alien as advanced as Q, seems ridiculous. Q continues in this scene going from the conquistador, I can never pronounce that word, I'm sorry, folks, to an army general, I assume, from World War II into the 2079 military armor wearing guy. It's 8.5 minutes in, but we finally get the first bit of dialogue from Worf and from Tasha Yar as well. Not the best dialogue, but not the worst. So Captain Picard kind of gives Yar a little bit of a slap down, and then he looks at Q and he starts basically trying to convince Q that humans aren't that bad, saying, "Hey, people like you, self-righteous, want to judge and prosecute." And Q's like, "Hey, you know what? That's a wonderful idea. I'm going to go away. I'll be back, and we're going to do just like you say." And then he gives a little salute, and that's when everybody disappears, which is the first time that a hand motion is used in conjunction with his powers, although I don't believe it's the same as his snap. It was just he left on the salute, not the salute being the manifestation of his powers that allowed him to lead. So immediately after Q is gone, Worf pops up and says, "Yo, we gotta fight." Tar says, "Yeah, we gotta fight or we gotta run away." And Picard looks at Troy and says, "How do you feel about it?" And she goes, "Nah, that dude's scary. I think we should run." And so Picard looks at Data and says, "Hey, can we detach the saucer section at warp?" And Data's like, "Nah, we shouldn't do that." And Picard's like, "But can we?" And Data's like, "Yeah, sure we can, but if we mess up, we all dead." And I'm paraphrasing on all of this. So Picard insists that no transmitted signals or intercom be used, but they're still transmitting the printout data all around the ship. So not going to talk about it. Y'all can discuss it in the comments. So we see a shot of engineering, them getting ready for maximum acceleration. Worf comes back up to the bridge, tell the captain that the engine room is ready. Troy lets Picard know that the departments are reporting as ready, and Picard gives the order for some of the bridge crew to transfer to the battle bridge. He also transfers his command codes and stuff like that to the battle bridge as well. We get down to the battle bridge, and he tells Yar how he wants the photon torpedoes to detonate at a particular time, and they go ahead and fire those, and then they do a countdown for the saucer separation. And one of the first issues that I have with this whole sequence is when they're separating the saucer sections, you see the movable docking clamps that have come up and go into recesses on the saucer. There are in the star drive and they recess into the saucer section. However, on either side, the top of the star drive section or the underside of the saucer, one of the things you don't see is circles or ports or interface areas for things like turbolift and EPS conduits and plasma conduits and stuff like that. You don't see any of that. The only interface mechanisms that you see between the star drive and saucer sections is the docking clamps. Now, I know that they were using models whenever they filmed this. It's always just struck me as weird that there didn't see any apparent way to actually physically travel between the saucer and the star drive, even though we see them do it all the time. The other issue that I had with this sequence is with the speeds that are given in this sequence, starting out at 9.3 and then 9.5, and the Q spear traveling at up to 9.9, it seems like it takes an awful long time after Tasha Yar launches the photon torpedoes, and when those torpedoes detonate to blind Q and make them not see the saucer separation, which is pointless anyway, because within a minute or so of them getting to the location that they stopped at, the Q sphere surrounds the ship again, and they can obviously tell that half of the ship is missing because Q doesn't actually come back onto the Enterprise when they're in the battle bridge. Instead, he merely transports the bridge crew into the courtroom where he tries to judge them for being a savage race. As far as the courtroom scene, I really don't have a lot to say. It doesn't necessarily invoke a sense of any particular time period's court. It is a perfect example of a terrible court. I will give it that. I don't necessarily understand the galley full of raggedy people. The whole scene, while it gets its point across of being a trial held loosely by one's peers, and since Q is trying to judge the Enterprise crew as being dangerous savages, why would you not use the peers of the time that was the most dangerous and savage? So Picard admits that humans are guilty, but he says, hey, test us. We can be better than what we have been before. Give us a test. We have a long mission. And Q's like, no, we don't need a long mission. Your current mission, this Farpoint station, will be all the test that you need. And he tells them you might not be smart enough to get this, sends them back to the battle bridge. Upon their return, they realize that they are on their way to Farpoint, and apparently they had never stopped, so all of the time that they had spent in the 2079 court was not wasted. It was still moving them towards Farpoint Station. A bit of dialogue between the bridge crews talking about Farpoint Station and whether their visit there will be boring or interesting, and the captain, at least, feels like it'll be interesting. So now we move the action to Farpoint Station, and we get a first officer's log from Commander Riker, even though he hasn't officially taken up his duties aboard the Enterprise, because the Enterprise hasn't arrived there yet. He's still doing a first officer's log. We meet Groppler Zorn, and I don't know about anybody else, but I have never liked this guy. Not the actor. The actor is perfectly fine. I believe it's Michael Bell playing this part. The actor is fine. It's the character of Groppler Zorn, the fake friendliness and all smiles, and I don't understand how he literally got Riker outside the door, immediately turned around and started bashing the alien. wildly gesticulating and yelling and Riker not hearing him. That was the most amazing thing about this whole sequence. But I'd like to hear your thoughts on this and how you guys felt about Groppler Zorn the first time that you watched this. We get a nice establishing shot of the old Bandy City next to the gleaming new Farpoint station, which should really give someone pause anyway, being like, wait a minute, these people are in stone and wood houses, and you're going to tell me they built this shiny new space station? I guess that alone is why it's the mystery at Farpoint, because generally speaking, you don't have people that live in basically stone houses, rock houses, making space stations. Through Commander Riker, we are introduced to Dr. Beverly Crusher and her son Wesley. They get a little bit more information about this mystery at Farpoint. Whenever Crusher is looking at some material and thinks gold would look good with this, they look away, and as soon as they look back, the red material has a gold inlay on it, and they all three be like, wait a minute, that wasn't there before. They definitely get interested very quickly. We get a quick introduction to Geordi LaForge here, and for whatever reason, Riker seems particularly formal and stiff with Geordi. Geordi walks up and says, "Hey, Commander, I just wanted to let you know." And Riker's like, "Is this an official report?" And Geordi's like, "Oh, yeah, sorry. Commander LaForge reporting the Enterprise." And it seems way too formal. He was not that formal with Dr. Crusher. In fact, he kind of hit on her just a little bit, but he's super formal with Geordi. I don't know. It kind of seemed weird. In the real world, it's first episode, they're still ironing all of this stuff out and everything, so it makes sense if you think about it from this perspective of a show, but if you think about it within the logic of the show, it's kind of weird and favoritism-ish. That isn't a word. You are more than welcome to suggest an appropriate replacement for that in the comments below. After Geordi makes his report, Commander Riker beams up to the Enterprise, and I never noticed this until I was able to watch this on the Blu-ray version. The transporter overlay effect only comes up to just below Jonathan Frakes' temple. So in this scene right here, the top third of his head is not actually in the transporter effect, which every time I see it is just absolutely hilarious. Even in the very next scene, which is Riker materializing on the transporter pad, the transporter effect is stretched so that it covers his entire body. We get a little walk and talk in the corridors between Riker and Yar. Riker asks, "So, missing saucer, what's up?" And Yar is like, "Captain will tell you." We get up to the battle bridge. There's a brisk interaction between Picard and Riker. And then Riker goes over to a little viewer that recaps what happens on their way to Farpoint Station, humorously using the exact same camera angles from the TV show. Riker gets finished with his update and he goes to the Battle Bridge Ready Room, which honestly looks like a janitor's closet with a desk in it, but definitely an interesting set that they do not use enough. Picard and Riker have a little chat. Picard's like, "By the way, when the saucer section gets here, we're going to do that reconnection manually, and I want you to take care of that." And Riker looks confused for a moment and be like, "Manually? Why would we do it manually?" He's like, "Okay, whatever, sir." Back out on the battle bridge, uh, Data asks, "Are you going to do this manually?" And Riker's like, "Yeah, as ordered." And then the look that Data gives Yar is absolutely on point. It is a fantastic look. It just screams, "Is this guy nuts?" And then the look on Data's face as he's walking back to his station is, well, I guess today is a good day to die. The manual reconnection of the saucer section proceeds, and for the drama that was set up with Data's look and Riker's confusion about having to do it manually, he really only had to make 4 commands: change the attitude 3 degrees down, lower velocity, kill velocity, alert the decks to, prepare for reconnection. In practice, the manual reconnection of the saucer and star drive sections was a lot easier than what it was made out to be just seconds before. It's still an interesting sequence, and I will point out yet again, there's no connections for turbo lifts or EPS conduits or anything like that. The only connections between the saucer and the star drive is the docking clamps. I really like that they took the time in the first episode to establish that Riker doesn't like captains beaming down, or at least his captain beaming down, because of the unknowns on a planet. Even if it seems safe, it's better to not endanger the captain. And Captain Picard seems to respect that and also asks Riker, hey, keep me away from kids, or if I have to be around children, don't let me make an ass out of myself, which, to be perfectly honest, is a reasonable request. We get another glory shot of the bridge, which is absolutely gorgeous. Commander Riker asks where Lieutenant Data is, and Worf tells him Data's on a special assignment. He's shuttling an admiral with a shuttle, and Riker's a little confused, like, why wouldn't they just beam? Then we cut to Data and the admiral walking down the hall, and the admiral is Bones McCoy from the original series, and the people that I knew that watched this absolutely loved this sequence. They said it was very heartwarming and everything. I was happy to see Bones again, and especially that, why do you feel like you need to scatter my atoms all over the universe? This scene was absolutely fantastic the first time I watched it, and I still love it. We see the Hood break orbit, and the Hood is an Excelsior class and looks kind of small next to the impressive mass of the Galaxy class next to it. We cut to the bridge, and there's a little banter between Picard and Riker. Q pops up on the view screen like, yo, I'm still here, did you forget about me? And Worf is absolutely hilarious. He stands up real quick, points a phaser at the view screen, and Picard's like, Lieutenant, what do you intend to do? Blast a hole in the viewer? And it's just great. It's one of the first examples of Sassy Picard. And for me personally, Sassy Picard is best Picard. Picard basically tells Q, hey, if you're trying to test us, let us do this on our own. Get out of here. And Q's like, you guys take too long. You have 24 hours. So now the episode has a ticking clock. Worf apologizes for almost blasting a hole in the viewer, and Riker tries to, encourage him. Hey, you reacted fast, and Picard's like, yeah, but you did it stupidly, and you kind of get an example of the different command styles here. Riker leads from a level of positive reinforcement, whereas Picard leads from, hey, this is what happened, this is what we need, let me help you get there. Or at least that's my impression of it. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this little sequence in the comments below. I'm really asking you guys to comment a lot, aren't I? I love engagement. And the end of this sequence is just fantastic. Riker coming up to Picard and saying, what do we do? This guy's watching our every moves. And Picard's like, we do what we always do. If we're going to be damned, let's be damned for what we are. And honestly, that is probably my favorite line in the entire episode, because that is just so true. If you're going to be damned for who you are. We come back from what I assume is a commercial break in the original run to find out that 11 of the 24 hours have passed, and Riker and Picard are in the ready room discussing Farpoint Station and DNAB 4. We get our first view of Livingston the fish in Picard's ready room here, and there isn't really anything else that is revealed in the ready room that we don't already know from having watched the episode. It is curious that as they're walking out of the ready room, Picard's eye line is looking above the door until the doors open, and I thought that was just an interesting little tidbit to include. They leave the ready room, and we have the first meeting between Troy and Riker, which, in my opinion, is an extremely awkward scene. Not only with the way that they interact with each other, but the obvious obliviousness of Captain Picard in the background whenever he's like, oh, have you two met each other? And he doesn't see the obvious butter thick tension between the two of them, and the way Riker keeps swallowing real hard, and it's just, for me, the entire scene is awkward. From there, Picard, Riker, and Troy go down to the old Bandy City to meet with Groppler Zorn to hash out usage of Farpoint Station, or even the engineers and architects that designed it, or They even go as far as, hey, can we get some builders just to build like Farpoint? And at every turn, Groppler Zorn is poo-pooing and shushing and doesn't really want to answer anything. Zorn does mention the Ferengi for the first time, which is nice. They do take this opportunity to set them up. At this point, Troy starts feeling another presence not related to the bandy, but close by the bandy. And that's when Zorn loses his crap just a little bit and starts going off on how we created something just perfect for you. And Picard notates that, Grappler Zorn has been very evasive about answers and basically says, hey, we may need to step back and reconsider this momentarily. Picard and company go ahead and leave the office of Grappler Zorn as Zorn tries to, I don't know if it's necessarily blackmail or just, hey, by the way, I got someone else interested, but he throws the Ferengi at them again, and Picard's like, yeah, I hope they don't eat you like they did the last people. And that line just cracks me up every time. I don't care when I watch it, it is great. Back aboard the Enterprise in orbit, Commander Riker is still looking for Data, and he runs into a very short but flirtatious ensign that shows him how to use the panels on the wall to show him where a particular section or person is. Riker walks away and gets a definite down-up look from the ensign before she smiles and leaves. Commander Riker is then guided to a holodeck, and this is where they're introducing the holodecks for the first time. I don't really have a whole lot to say about holodecks in this episode because this is the only sequence that we get with a holodeck, and we don't really get a whole bunch of information about them. More information comes about the holodecks in later episodes that are more holodeck specific. We'll go over much more information about the holodecks whenever it is more appropriate. Data does explain a little bit about the holodeck, showing the reverse wall, which I've always thought was interesting because Data picks up the rock, throws it at the back wall. The camera shifts 180 degrees because it was focused on their back when they threw the rock in front of them to impact the back wall. Then the camera rotates around to their front and they walk into the camera, which means in this little sequence, they pick up a rock, or Data at least picks up a rock, throws it at the back wall, and then walks into the back wall. So I thought that was interesting. Wesley comes in looking for Commander Riker. He talks about the holodeck a little more, ends up falling into the stream that they're on opposite sides of. Data jumps down, lifts him out of the water, and then the scene cuts to Picard walking by the holodeck, the three of them walking out with Wesley dripping, but there's no water on Data's uniform, even though there was in the scene moments ago. There's a brief scene of Wesley and Dr. Crusher interacting, Wesley letting her know of some of the activities on board the Enterprise. The main point was him wanting to be able to take a look at the bridge. Dr. Crusher reminds Wesley that that is against the captain's standing orders. Wesley asks her if she's afraid of the captain, and she says she's not afraid of him and explains a little bit about Picard's character, lets him know that she would indeed try to get him a look at the bridge. We cut back to Farpoint Station, and an away team comprised of Riker, Data, Yar, LaForge, and Troy are walking through the main mall of Farpoint Station. Yar makes a suggestion that they should investigate the underside of the station, and Troy almost immediately makes an attempt to get her and Commander Riker alone somewhere dark. Riker takes a moment, thinks better of it, and sends Yar, LaForge, and Troy to investigate the underside of the station while him and Data go do something else. The look of disappointment on Troy's face is both heartbreaking and hilarious at the same time, depending on what kind of mood you're in. So the group under Farpoint is Yar, LaForge, and Troy. LaForge is unable to identify any of the materials that go into the construction of Farpoint. When Riker asks, Troy senses the same emotions that she did in the old Bandy City, but much more localized. Riker and Data beam to the underground where the rest of the away team is, and they have a little conference and then continue to explore the tunnels. We cut back to the Enterprise where the turbo lift opens and Picard sees that Wesley is there and he reiterates his directive about children not being allowed on the bridge. Dr. Crusher steps out and she's like, "Hey, my son's not on the bridge. He's in the turbo lift." And Picard's like, "Your son?" Like, he hasn't seen this person before, even though he did not too long ago in front of the holodeck. They reference once again about Picard bringing Wesley's father after he died home to them, and Picard says, "Well, since he's here, go ahead and bring him onto the bridge." Gives him a little tour, shows him the captain's chair, and Wesley, obviously knowing something about starship operations, notices that there is something breaking the proximity barrier of the Enterprise's sensors. Commotion happens, and Wesley and Crusher are rushed off the bridge with a few sharp words between Picard and Crusher. The object that was breaking the proximity barrier turned out to be a ship, and the ship was comparatively massive to the Enterprise at 12 times their volume. They tried communicating with the ship, hailing it. Nothing worked. The away team down on the planet in the tunnels realized that their communicators weren't working, so they worked their way up to the surface just about the time that the ship in orbit started lobbing energy balls or something like that down at the old Bandy City. Tasha, LaForge, and Troy all beam back up to the Enterprise, whereas Riker and Data go to investigate more about what's going on in the city. And once they're able to contact the Enterprise, Picard says, "Hey, I want to talk to Groppler Zorn. Go get him." Starts asking Troy and Yar, what options they have available, essentially. Once he arms the phasers and has them locked on to the ship in orbit that is firing on the Bandy City, Q pops in and starts berating Picard about arming the phasers and what about the casualties down below. Picard gets in contact with Crusher and reveals that they've already got medical on the way to the Bandy City to help the injured. Picard tells the helm to move the ship in between the spaceship that's firing on the Bandy City and the Bandy City, but the controls are locked out. On the planet's surface, Data and Riker are almost blown up on their way to get Groppler Zorn. In Groppler Zorn's office, they find him hiding under a table. He continues to try to lie about knowing what's going on, and Riker's just like, "All right, we'll leave you here." And he begs for them to help him, and as he's begging, he's snatched away in what appears to be a very painful purple beam. Back on the bridge of the Enterprise, Q is still trying to egg Captain Picard into firing on the unknown ship when Troy suddenly starts feeling a new emotion, satisfaction. She's feeling it from somewhere very close. Riker and Data being back up and come to the bridge where Q tries to goad Picard into sending an away team over to the unknown vessel. And of course, Riker's like, "Yeah, I want to go over there and find out what's going on." Picard then leaves the bridge and goes to apologize to Dr. Crusher about yelling at Wesley a few minutes ago on the bridge. And while he's there, he's like, "Hey, I know I'm the guy that brought your husband back to you whenever he died, and if this is going to cause problems, I will approve any request that you put in." And she's like, "No, I chose this. I want to be here." He's like, "Well, I hope we can be friends then." Meanwhile, Riker and the away team of Yar, Data, and Troy beam over to the unknown vessel. They beam into an area that is almost exactly like the area below Farpoint Station on the planet below. However, there's no hum of motors or machineries. Troy starts feeling really intense hatred directed at the Bandy City. They proceed down a long hallway until they find Groppler Zorn being suspended and obviously tortured. They free him, and that seems to piss off the unknown ship quite severely. Picard is back on the Enterprise trying to get the transporter chief on the comm to beam them back over. Q appears and tells Picard that his time is up. and that the transporter chief can't hear Picard, obviously because Q is stopping communication. Picard bargains with Q, or at least tries to, even going so far as to say he would do anything Q wants to try to help his away team on the unknown vessel whenever they appear at the beginning of the bridge. And Q's like, "You'll do anything I want?" And Troy's like, "Hey, Q didn't save us, that thing over there did." Riker confirms it. They start asking Groppler Zorn what's going on a bit more pointedly, and he says that they didn't do anything wrong, and Picard figures it out that Farpoint Station is something similar to the unknown ship that is outside of the Enterprise. At this point, the ship kind of goes through a metamorphosis, flips over to reveal itself as a giant space jellyfish. Picard, whenever he figured it out, had Yar change the main phasers to deliver an energy beam, and at this point, he tells her to deliver the phaser energy to the creature on the surface that is Farpoint Station. At this point, Q chimes in and says, "Oh, I see the problem was too easy," whenever 5 minutes ago he was saying it was too difficult. That's basically your basis of Q. He thinks something is hard until you figure it out, and then it was too easy. He's basically Schrodinger's douchebag. Don't get me wrong, I love the character, but sometimes he's out there. The energy beam that Tasha was firing down to Farpoint Station gets some feedback. They cut it off. The station rises from the ground, revealing itself as a second space jellyfish. They meet in space and express their joy and gratitude in a way that Troy can understand it. And then, since we never see these two ever again, to the best of my knowledge in Star Trek, I'm going to assume that they lived happily ever after. Picard then proceeds to kick Q off of the ship, and Q's like, "Fine, I'll leave for now because I want to. Y'all are boring, but I'll be back." And flashes away, again, not using his snap or hand motion, just disappearing. In the coda, we learned that Starfleet has agreed to rebuild Farpoint Station with the Bandy. Riker comments that hope all of our missions aren't this interesting, and Picard's like, "Nah, the things we're going to do in the future are going to be a lot more interesting than this." So my final thoughts on the episode are that it is a good episode of Star Trek. It's not the best and it's not the worst. It's a good, solid middle ground episode. As we review and talk about these episodes, I'm going to award them 0 out of 10 spots. And it's purely my opinion and means absolutely nothing. And we're going to start by giving Encounter at Farpoint 6 spots. We're also going to pick a least valuable character, somebody who did so little in the episode or didn't do hardly anything that their contributions didn't matter. The rules for least valuable character is that they have to be a main cast member or a non-guest star extra with speaking lines. And for this particular episode, our least valuable character is going to be Lieutenant Torres, because after he got the cold shoulder, we didn't see him anymore. And I'd like for you to leave your ranking of spots and your least valuable character in the comments below. That finishes our review of Encounter at Farpoint. I can't wait to read your comments and how you felt about this episode, and I hope you'll join us next time whenever we review the next episode of Star Trek The Next Generation. It's been wonderful having you here for our review. I've been your host, Swizzle, and I hope you live long and prosper.